The Lost Battalion is a tale of focus, commitment, and sheer will. In 1918, an inexperienced American infantry battalion found themselves surrounded and cut off by the enemy. However, instead of surrendering, they followed their orders to hold their objective. They fought savagely through withering enemy fire, artillery, flame, and hand-to-hand combat. Those 554 men fought for 6 days straight, abandoned in the Argonne. The Lost Battalion was a part of the US 77th Division, nicknamed the Liberty Division. They were made up primarily of men from New York City. While inexperienced in the combat of the First World War, these men were tough, having scraped together what they had from the unforgiving streets of New York. Those sons of Polish, Italian, and Irish bastards would show those krauts how Americans fight a war. Their orders were clear. On October 2nd, attack through the German lines and seize a vital crossroads near Hill 198. Those men would do just that, and fought like demons through the German lines to their objective. However, as night fell that day, a massive German counterattack pushed back the French on their left and the Americans on their right. As Major Whittlesey stood upon the top of the hill, he could not see or hear any of the units that were supposed to be tied in with them. A consummate officer, he remarked that it was unthinkable that his comrades retreated. They had orders that forbade falling back. Unbeknownst to Whittlesey, the Germans were severing American lines of communication and completing the encirclement. Major Whittlesey attempted to make contact with any surrounding units and his rear support, but the communications and runners never made it. It was not apparent that they were alone, and so they dug in and prepared for a fight. Whittlesey could see the Germans taking up attack positions and moving closer. As expected, the next day saw the Germans attacking from all sides. First came a charge by infantry. The Americans held. Then came withering sniper fire. The Americans still were unmoved. Then the Germans began a close-quarters grenade assault supported by heavy mortars, and still the Americans fought on. By the end of the day, the Americans had suffered many casualties, but inflicted just as many on the krauts. The next morning, a heavy artillery barrage began to fall on the Americans. Whittlesey quickly realized that it was coming from the Americans. They were being bombarded by their own shells. The American artillery's aim was off, and instead of shielding the Lost Battalion from attack, they were blowing them apart. Whittlesey only had a single carrier pigeon left, his only hope to communicate with his command to cease the bombardment. He sent off Cher Ami with the message, and then, immediately, a shell exploded under the bird, fluttering it to the ground. It seemed that hope was lost. But Cher Ami, a pigeon who carried the lives of hundreds of Americans upon her wings, took flight again and made it to the American lines. She had been shot through the breast, blinded in one eye, and had a leg hanging only by a tendon. The Americans received the message of, "Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." The artillery was stopped, and Cher Ami would survive the war as a hero of the 77th Division. However, the fight for those lost Yankees was just beginning. After the artillery stopped, the Germans charged with fierce bayonet fighting ensuing. Again, the Germans were forced back. At this point, the Americans were nearly out of ammo, had no food, and were recycling bandages off of the dead for the wounded. The only water available was exposed to German fire. And yet these Americans, possessed by the spirit of liberty and pure star-spangled grit, fought on for 3 more days. Repeatedly, the Germans asked them to surrender. Major Whittlesey did not even humor them with a response. Growing desperate, the Germans sent in an elite battalion of stormtroopers, supported by flamethrowers, to uproot the Americans. Those vengeful spirits of the Argonne still held firm. On the 6th day, American relief forces had finally pushed through and relieved the beleaguered Lost Battalion, owing in no small part to Major Whittlesey and his unbreakable line tying up so many German units. Of the over 500 men who entered the Argonne, only 194 made it out. 7 of those men would receive the Medal of Honor for their actions, with all others receiving a Distinguished Service Cross or Silver Star. The actions of the Lost Battalion exemplified commitment to duty and the necessary sacrifice it takes to achieve the mission. Shortly after being relieved, the French and Americans would achieve a breakthrough in the Argonne, partially thanks to those New Yorkers on the hill who refused to yield.